Good morning, grinders. Welcome to RotoGrinders Today. I'm Jordan Cooper, a.k.a. BlenderHD, BlenderHD. If you want to follow me on Twitter. And it's Friday, August 23rd, and we will be taking a look at tomorrow's UFC DFS slate on DraftKings. We got 12 fights now. It was 9. They added 3. We have the replacement fighters. We have fighters that don't even have betting lines yet. It's a kind of a mess. We don't even have reflective ownership projected. So this is kind of a first look today. And I'll be on with Mike H3 Buddha tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern for a crunch time. Once we actually get like lines for some of these fights that were just added to the card. And yeah, so hit the thumbs up button on your way in the door. Give me the thumbs. Give me the subscribes. Give me the whatever, the notification bells to know when we go live. We got Grinders live later today for MLB and crunch time. So if you're looking for baseball stuff, that'll be later today. But I got Squirrel Patrol, John Breslin on. You were away in what, South Africa? You were out. You were gallivanting around the world while we were dealing with some really crappy UFC cards, even though last week was actually pretty good. The pay-per-view was actually pretty damn good.
Yeah, I thought it was in South Africa because Drake Duplessis is South African. I get there. It's a 15-hour flight. The card's in Australia. But yeah, no. Had a nice little family safari vacation. But yeah, still, was paying attention to the UFC. Everybody over there was excited about the card. And yeah, it ended up being a pretty good one. And we are, as is often the case after pay-per-view cards, we are now left with a lot of unknown fighters and a lot of debuting fighters. And I think, in our short time just talking before the show, I think the same thing kind of struck us that we have limited lines. I don't know how the projections team makes projections. I don't know how anybody makes projections when we have such limited information on some of these fighters. Like with, we just have some like shady offshore lines coming out now. And some limited information over over under 1.5 rounds, over under 2.5 rounds. But that does make it interesting. It makes it an interesting DFS card because there is such limited information. And then it's also a good card if you're like really into the weeds of UFC and the lower level promotions. It's a fun card for you because it's the Ultimate Fighter. I think 3 of the fights are like Ultimate Fighter concluding fights, or at least fighters who are from the Ultimate Fighter season this year. So yeah, some debuting fighters and maybe some fighters that are on their way out also as a result. Fighters fighting for their job. So it's an interesting card.
It's a very unique structure of card from a lineup construction perspective. So we talk about DFS strategy here. Obviously, if you're a premium member at RotoGrinders, you can listen to the Ground and Pound podcast right now. Liam and Mike go break down every single fight. I typically listen to that this afternoon, so I don't even know, right? So we're just going by the numbers. We're just going by DFS strategy, lineup construction, how to win these large field GPPs. And yeah, if you want to listen to that podcast, join us. Hit the link in the description. Get $40 off your first month. But typically, we talk about the contextual variables of the slate, right? What the optimal lineup is more likely or less likely to look like. It's a 12-fight card, kind of like in the middle, right? So we still want to kind of prioritize ceilings, especially for the underdogs. But we'll take an underdog win at 90. I mean, that could be fine. And then also the spreads of the fights, and we do have like really significant favorites with in the 9K range, but the salary dynamics, because they added these fights, we have 2 fighters. We have basically 2 8,500, 7,700 fights and 2 8,400, $7,800 fights, and we have 2. We have a $9,600 and a $9,500 fighter. Then it drops to $9,200, then $9,000, and then directly down to $8,700. So There's no 94, 93. There's no 91. There's no 89 or 88. So, like, you either go really up and really down, or a lot of the stuff is in the middle. But we have, let's talk about the main event first. Kyle Borralho, 8,600. Jared Cannonier, 7,600. Borralho is minus 240 favorite, plus 175 inside the distance. We do actually have lines for these for some of these fights. Cannonier just came off. I mean, we just saw Cannonier lose and not. I mean, maybe it was a bad stoppage. I think he would have lost the fight anyway. Borralho is a very good fight IQ fighter, grappler, but is perfectly fine on his feet as well. Cannonier has faced like pretty much the who's who of that division. Borralho hasn't. But Borralho, they're just basically saying Cannonier's 40 and he's done. I'm not sure if that's the case. It's an $8,600, $7,600 fight that is a 5-round fight in the mid-range. I have to look. I mean, I have to look at both sides here, right, John? Because Cannonier's path to victory is probably an early knockout, and that'll be optimal at 7,600. And Borralho could, if he goes 5 rounds, could easily have 15 minutes of control time in total with several takedowns. What are your thoughts on how more or less than the field? I'm assuming this main event is going to be popular. Are you going to be over that or under? Are you more likely to build mid-range constructions that don't contain the main event?
It's possible. I think it's a pretty good main event. I don't think it's a have to have it main event, but it is tough. So this is a 12-fight card as of now. Weigh-ins I think are at noon, and hopefully we don't lose a fight because it's already a card that feels a little bit smaller than 12 fights. And I say that I think in part because we have that big pricing gap at the top of the salary range, where I think it's going to be difficult to fit in the $9,600 and $9,500 fighters. And we'll see what the projected ownership is. My guess is that the $9,600 and $9,500 fighters are going to be owned at a higher rate, or at least projected to be owned at a higher rate, probably both, than I want to roster them, because it's going to be really difficult to put together a lineup that's likely to get like 6 wins with one of those fighters in it. Because we just don't have a lot on this card to work with. So I mean, that's like we've talked about it in the past, and we've seen it in cards in the past where like a $9,600 or $9,500 fighter goes out, gets a first round win, and has one of the top 3 scores on the card, and still gets priced off the winning GPP lineup if not enough underdogs win on the card. So it's almost like outside of those fighters' control, and like I don't know that the $9,500 and $9,600 fighter is going to be necessarily that high scoring in their wins. So yeah, it feels like a small card, and that makes me lean with like just the math. And also, we have so much uncertainty on this card with so little to work with. Like one of the fights is 5 rounds. I don't know. Yeah, and it's not priced higher than the other fights. Maybe I should try to have more of that fight than some of the other fights. We'll see where the projected ownership lands. But I agree. I think it's a pretty good fight. And like Cannonier, I put up a pretty decent score in his last fight. I think it went into the 4th round. They still had almost like 50 DraftKings points. That's a decent volume if he'd gotten the win. So I think there's a good chance. And this one's projected, I think, for about even money to go under 4.5 rounds. So you're probably going to get some extra points from this fight. And so I think that, stacking it in cash is probably a good idea. And also like having more of this fight than some of the other fights is probably a good idea. That doesn't mean you have to have it. But yeah, I think it's got, just simply has a higher chance than most of the other fights of landing on the win line.
Okay, let's take a look at the 9K fighters, because you mentioned obviously we have 2 really high price fighters. We have Wang Kong minus 1,200 to win, Michael Morales minus 850 to win at 9,500, Zachary Reese minus 600 to win at 9,200, and Edmund Shabazian minus 300 to win at 9,000. But the inside the distance lines, Kong is minus 215, Morales is plus 130, Reese is minus 325, and Shabazian is minus 250. I know you like looking at with these pricing, the first round odds are really what we kind of look at more. So as of yesterday, if we convert the round one odds to win probability, and I don't take out the VIG because I leave everything VIG off anyway, because it's the same. As long as I don't do it to anyone, it's all relative. I don't care about perfect accuracy. Kong has a 34% chance of winning in the first round. Morales 18%, Reese 48%, Shabazian 44%. I think based on this dynamic, like you mentioned before, that you think the $9,600 and $9,500 fighters, Kong and Morales, are going to be overowned. I actually think the opposite. I think that more people are going to there's so many more line of constructions that you feel comfortable with Reese and Shabazian that I think Morales may end up coming in at 16% ownership, and Kong comes at 24% owned. Like they're not low owned, but they're not high owned. And I think Reese and Shabazz, Reese I could easily see coming in at 46% owned. I look at these first round win odds and I go, I think that Reese and Shabazz may end up being closer to their 40% owned, because there's no $8,900 or $8,800 fighter, and you start. These inside the distance lines are so dramatically different than Slava Claus at 8,700, who's plus 140, and Robert Valentin at 8,400, who's plus 135, which is a great inside. I like that fight in general when we talk about it. I just think that it's just so much easier to. You could play Reese and or Shabazian in a lineup where you look at it and go, I think I'm getting 6 wins here, right?
Yeah.
Once you start playing Morales and Kong, you're like, I got to take a shot on someone. Cannonier better win that fight because I need to put him in the lineup, right? You get into those constructions. So I just think more people are gonna just say, hey, the inside the distance lines on Reese and Shabazian are actually better than the other two fighters. So they're just gonna play those. So I'm not necessarily sure you're gonna get it's the 96, 95. I think Reese and Shabazian are gonna be twice as owned as the other two.
That's possible, but I think they should be. So I think that's I'm gonna try to roster these guys at 40-something%, because that's what their first round win odds are. And at 9,000 and 9,200, I think they have a much better chance of landing on the winning lineup. And I think that's what our simulations will show, is that they have a better chance of landing on the winning lineup. If all 4 of the 9,000 price fighters get a first round win, Shabazian and Reese have a much better chance of landing on the winning lineup, just because you have more salary to work with. 600 between Kong and Shabazian is a big gap. When you then go with the rest of your lineup, that's a big gap in pricing. So especially because if you're playing Kong, then you're probably not playing her opponent Leonardo. So then you don't get the opportunity to play the absolute minimum price fighter. So yeah, I agree. I think they could be highly owned, but they should be highly owned. And I'd rather eat the ownership on fighters who should be highly owned than maybe try to get too different on something that's just mathematically so difficult. I do think that if we'll take a look when we get projected ownership. And it's a really interesting test for projected ownership, because there's a thought that everyone's going to realize, it's so difficult to put Kong and Morales in a lineup and then have a decent lineup, with the rest of your lineup. But there is also a thought some people are just going to look at the, 4 digits for the win odds, right? Minus 1,000, minus 1,200. Go, wow, I got to get, I've got to put that fighter in my lineup. And she actually doesn't have terrible inside the distance odds. It's just she's really got to put up a massive score, pay off a $9,600 price tag. And Morales might end up coming in very low owned. I'm probably going to have him fairly low owned, just because he's got a history of not having massive scores, of getting wins, getting convincing wins that just aren't that high scoring for DraftKings purposes. And so that's something I'm looking to avoid. If he's got a history of not scoring well and pulling out the win, he's probably going to do the same thing in this fight. So he'll almost certainly get the win, but he's going to have a hard time landing on the win line.
I'm going to make the bull and bear case for Wang Kong at 9,600. Okay. I mean, obviously the bear case is that obviously she needs to put up a lot of points at 9,600 to make the optimal lineup. But also she's a kickboxer. Like I'm much more willing to take shots on very high priced massive favorites if they're grapplers, because they could have a dominant performance 30-27 and score 172 points in the process in a 3-round, like a third round finish, like, or anything like that. But if they're just strikers, like, it's kind of hard to do that. Like, I need a first round finish, and even the bull case, and I say this on a lot of cards when we talk about these 9K fighters with these types of win odds, is that intellectually you look at it and you go, okay, minus 1,200 is a 92% favorite, 68% inside the distance, 34% in the round one. She may end up looking like a minus 75,000 favorite and absolutely obliterates Leonardo and scores on. Like, it could be one of those fights where we're wondering why the referee has not stopped the fight because she's knocked out on her feet standing against the it's one of those fights where oh, she set the striking 1-round record of 130 strikes in one. Like, it could be that lopsided. And like Morales and Reese, like, well, like when the lines get to that extent, sometimes it's just like, yeah, their opponent shouldn't have even been. Like, they might as well have pulled someone out of the crowd to be there, like that type of thing. I'm not saying that that's going to happen, but like, that doesn't. Those type of outcomes typically don't happen in the pick'em range of fights, because they wouldn't be minus 150 favorites unless someone death gasses. You're not going to really see like someone obliterate someone, but you never know. You might see Wang Kong just go out and obliterate Leonardo, knock her down 4 times, get a second round finish, and score 148 points.
It's the Peyton Talbot corollary to the rule of $9,500, $9,600 fighters, right? Like, sometimes, because a fighter is priced up that high because I've got a massive chance of winning their fight. And sometimes, even if the fighter's style is to maybe be a little bit more cautious or pick their moment or whatever, like, sometimes it's just a mauling. And they just go out there, right? Like, what if Wang Kong gets 2 knockdowns in the first minute and that's it? And then, gets a 59-second victory with some significant strikes added. And she puts up a 140-point score. And suddenly, yeah, that's like almost like, that's 2 low-priced wins, right? It's like somebody could get a 70-point win in a 3-round decision. If Kong goes out and gets 140 points, that's like having 2 fighters in your lineup, and suddenly she's a bargain at 9,600. I'm willing to take that chance. I agree. Like, you have to take that risk. You have to make a decision somewhere. We don't really know if the ownership is going to end. Even when we get projected ownership, then people start making adjustments off of that. So we don't know anything. It's just that seems like a longer shot. I think there's more people are going to play for that possibility that she does put up a quick win, and then deserves. But like, I agree. Like, I think you think the opposite. So you think at least accept the possibility of the opposite. So yeah, we don't know. I think like Reese and Shabazian have the higher upside, and with so little to go on the card, I'm gonna, I think, just agree with the math. And if everybody else agrees with the math too, and the chalk, I'm just playing a bunch of chalk, then it is what it is. It's a difficult card to break down. So I'll go with what we know, and what we know is that, like, Reese and Shabazian have better inside the distance lines at a lower price.
Okay, we'll also go with what we know when it comes to underdogs. So let's take a look at them. You have him tagged. I mean, I think he's going to be a popular underdog because of he was going to fight David Silva, and now he's getting He's getting a new opponent. He still's the underdog, but he probably shouldn't be priced at 7,400. Probably should be the $7,800 fighter, and that's Dennis Bazooka at 7,400 plus 130 win odds. We don't have inside the distance lines for that fight, but Francis Marshall is a young, grappling heavy type of fighter. Bazooka is not good, but probably not bad. He's not bad. He's okay striker, okay grappler, whatever. On a card with, not many fighters, especially when they add these extra 85, 84, 78, 78. Like, you can't fit these guys into a lineup anyway. You're picking between them. So, like, you're going to need to play someone like Cannonier down. I'm assuming Bazooka is going to be the most popular just because of just win equity compared to the line. But, I mean, if you told me that no one under Cannonier wins, I wouldn't be shocked. But they're outside of Bazooka. There's two underdogs that I will be playing, but not in the same lineup. But I will be playing.
Wait, priced under who?
Under Cannonier.
There's 2 underdogs you're going to be playing?
There's 2 underdogs under Cannonier that I will be playing, not including Dennis Bazooka. But, I mean, if you want to talk about Dennis, but, I mean, you have him tagged in lineup HQ also for the same reason that just from a win equity perspective, you're getting plus 130 at 7,400. And as long as you're not building, like, the most, like, chalky constructions, I mean, he's probably if you were to rank underdogs to play, that Cannonier, under Cannonier, Bazooka would be number 1, right?
Yeah, I think so. He has the best win odds. So it's a slight mispricing, but like you said, it's not a massive mispricing. Yeah, sometimes we've seen this before where the favorite ends up at 7,400, or any can sometimes be a big favorite. Bazooka is still a underdog, but he's less of an underdog than he should be because of the opponent switch. I'm kind of hoping people don't notice that his win odds are much better than they should be, because he's still not a favorite. It won't necessarily be the highest scoring fight. I think it's projected to go the distance. Francis Marshall and Bazooka don't have like that high scores in their game log, but Bazooka doesn't have to do as much at 7,400 to land on the winning lineup. And I think he might have like one of the better shots of landing on the winning lineup in a loss if we get to that point on this card, just because the fight could go the distance. There could be some grappling. So he could be putting up a pretty good score for 7,400 either way. But yeah, in a win, it gives him a really good shot of landing on the winning lineup. I feel like the fighters priced under Bazooka are pretty long shots. Like they're long shots. And so I think obviously in like large field tournaments, they could see very low ownership, and so I'd want to be over the field. It won't take much to be over the field on them. But like for just reasonably, single entry and reasonably less than the big lottery type tournaments, probably it's tough to find anything good to say about them because they're such long shots. They have little chance of winning their fight.
I'll say something good about him then. Okay. My 2 underdogs underneath Cannonier that I will be playing, not in the same lineup, are Gerald Mearshart and Jose Medina.
Okay.
They're the direct opponents of Zach Reese and Edmund Shabazian. And this isn't a take on the underdogs. This is a take on the favorites. Yeah. I prefer Mearshart to Medina. Medina, like, I don't trust, like, Zach Reese, like, past the first round. I don't trust. Who knows? Who the hell knows? Jose Medina is probably not the guy to beat Zach Reese, but he's tough enough. I mean, like, Jose Medina is like one of these, like, he's not good anywhere, right? But like, the guy could probably take a punch for long enough time to maybe goes 3 rounds. Maybe Reese gasses out. Maybe. I doubt it. Like, I prefer Mearshart over Medina, and Mearshart, clear path to victory. We've seen Mearshart fights on the feet. It looks like he's going to get deaded, and then he pulls guard and secures a submission. Like at least I could see Mearshart, if the fight is on the mat, has a shot of winning. And Edmund Shabazian is historically, I mean, ultra historically, if he doesn't finish in the first round, death gasses. So, like, you show me a path to victory, I'm going to take a shot on a $7,200 fighter against a 45% owned guy that, if he doesn't win in the first round, typically just tires out and doesn't do anything. That's why, I mean, the leverage is there. I mean, Magny and Leonardo on the other, it's kind of weird. On the other hand, I really don't want to play the opponents of Kong and Morales because I think it's even less likely that they win. And it's hard to see how they do win outside of like just the favorite getting injured. Like, they do a kick and someone's toe gets broken or something. Like, I just don't see how that happens. At least the other one is it's volatile enough. Reese and Shabazian are volatile enough fighters that the underdog could get a first round, second round victory, and obviously they're going to be optimal at 72 or 7,000. So I, I would believe that you agree with me, and I agree. Like, I'm not saying like in the past section, like I was like, oh, against Reese and Shabazian. No, I agree. They probably should be 40% owned. I just think that Mearshart and Medina should probably be higher owned than whatever they're going to be. That I'm willing of playing. Not, I don't think what I think I have a clearer path to first place if one of Reese or Shabazian lose. Then they both win in their normal win condition at 40+%. If they go 40+% on and they both score 120 points, like I just move on to the next card. It's just like, okay, Mr. Chalk lineup wins, and them and 134 of their friends split first, and I just move on with my life. Like that's kind of my attitude here.
Yeah. It's difficult if we had a projected ownership number out there of like 55% or 60% or something on Zach Reese. I would be much more inclined to just start off with the thought process you've got. and so I'm thinking like Reese's ownership is gonna be under owned. If he's projected at like 55% ownership or something like that, like yeah, you gotta take the other side. It's interesting. I've gone back and forth with Medina because his inside the distance line still isn't that good. Because you would think that he would have for a massive underdog a reasonable inside the distance line because the fight is projected to end so early. But all of that is on the Zach Reese side. It's all on the Zach. Like Medina is still like a pretty big. I think it's 700 plus 700 to win inside the distance. And like that's I don't know. It's possible that Medina does win in like the second or third round and still doesn't put up that high of a score. But I agree, he probably doesn't need to, especially if Reese comes in at really high ownership. So we'll see. We'll see what the projected ownership mark on Reese comes in at. Yeah, I see the thought process. I'm more likely to go mid-range with the underdogs, and I kind of that's how I end up tagging them. But I see the thought process, and I think especially for if you're doing like 150 lineups for or just if you're doing a bunch of lineups for the large field contest, I think you should aim to be over the field on these like big underdogs because they do win sometimes, and people play them less than they win, and so when they win, it upsets the whole apple cart of the tournament. But I guess it's tough also to say anything about them that's good other than what you just said, because they are such long shots.
Okay, so what mid-range fights are we targeting? I mean, to me, some of these fights I don't even know who these people are. I mean, like it's like finding footage on the tough fighters or whatever. But the one that stands out to me is the Valentin Loader fight. That I mean, plus 135 for Valentin, plus 235 for Loader. It's minus 160, plus 140. It's in that range. Valentin tends to, just go straight forward, all action, and Loader has some grappling, and he wins typically quickly. I mean, for this mid-range price, 8,400 and 7,800. I mean, both sides of the fight have 100+ point potential. Is this? I mean, I would assume this is the best fight in the mid-range to target on either side. Although can you name some others?
Yeah, so actually, that's one that I might end up under the field on. So that's one that I just listening to people, like listening to like betting podcasts. That's one people are pretty excited about it. So I think that one might see a little bit higher ownership. Is Valentin and Loader, especially on the Valentin side. He's like just been described by everybody as extremely violent. But it concerns me that he might be a guy like a Trevor Peak, who is a guy that just throws massive punches, but doesn't necessarily throw a lot of them. And so, like Trevor Peak, if you watch a Trevor Peak fight, you're like, oh my god, that guy must have put up like a massive DraftKings score. and he doesn't always, because he is like loading up on his punches and he doesn't necessarily throw that high of a volume. I don't think there's much of a grappling game. Again, we have very little to go on, but I think Loader is the grappler, whereas Valentin is more of like the heavy striker. But Valentin's like inside the distance line isn't that great, and it maybe is not as high as people would expect. So maybe that makes the inside the distance a good bet. But it is possible that fight's a little bit of a disappointment. It's one of those fights that you watch and go, "Oh my god, these guys are like brutalizing each other," but then it doesn't put up that high. Like it ends up going into the third round, and you get like maybe a early third round finish or something, and it just doesn't, puts up 80 DraftKings points and isn't like the drafting score isn't as high considering the damage actually done in the fight. So that's one that I might end up under the field on, and I tag like Ramaska and Fletcher. That one actually has a pretty good chance of ending in under 1.5 rounds, which is the only bit of information we have to go on. Like Ramaska does have like a knockout win and a submission win, I believe, on a pre-UFC record. So that at least gives me some indication there could be some, either some good, early finish potential or some grappling. So yeah, I think the Valentin one, but like the Valentin Loader one could end up being a little bit overowned. I don't actually mind the idea of being over the field on some of the maybe more boring fighters, right? Like I think some people that are playing this card or playing this slate might, go over the field on the Ultimate Fighter fights. Like Angela Hill and Tabitha Ricci can put up some pretty decent scores. They're priced right in the mid range. So like the winner of that fight, could end up, being a low priced winner. And it's projected to go all 3 rounds. Like Hill and Ricci can put up decent scores over 3 rounds. Like over the course of 3 rounds. I don't mind the James Yontop and Slava fight. Like that's the one that could either end early, or Yontop can put up decent volume. Let's see, what is the other like kind of boring fight? Oh yeah, the Josiane Nunez and Cavalcanti fight. Like Cavalcanti can throw some really high volume. So she is a fighter at 8,500 that might end up being totally overlooked. And again, it can go 3 rounds. But I think like the fight props show her with over under 90 significant strikes. So that's a decent score over 3 rounds. And especially 8,500, she doesn't need to put up one of those massive scores. So like, I think going with some of the more boring fighters, the fighters we have a little bit of a history on, like maybe people gravitate to the unknown a little bit too much. And so that's maybe in the mid range. What I would do is actually try to go with some of the more boring fighters that we have a little bit of a history on, and just hope they hit one of their ceilings.
But lastly, from a lineup construction perspective, you're much more likely to have lineups that spend closer to 50K salary than ones that I don't see constructions where you're leaving 2K on the table and you're playing 4 underdogs on the slate. I'm looking at this as more of a slate where if 2 underdogs total win, I'm like going, okay. If you gave me a line on underdogs winning on the slate, I would set the line at like 2.5 with the under at -130, like something like that.
Yeah.
And in those types of scenarios, typically lineups that spend like 49K plus, 49.5 plus, 1 or 2 underdog lineups, that's going to be optimal. You don't, I mean, you're not, John, are you building lineups that leave 2K on the table?
No, right. When we have these fights, or we have these cards sometimes, where like the minimum underdog is like a 30% chance to win. It's like, oh, this is gonna be a good one to leave some money on the table. This is not that card. Like Leonardo has like a less than a 12% chance of winning by the Vegas odds. Magny has less than a 15% chance. Patina is not that much higher. It's not a good card to leave a bunch of salary on the table. I will say though that like when you're doing mass, like if you're using lineup HQ to make 150 lineups, the duplicating in price and the price gaps actually lead to a lot of situations where you end up with a few $100s on the table, more so than when you have a fighter at every price point. Just because like you have like these gaps where if you have if you have like 9,100 or 9,300 left, you're kind of have to have some kind of gap, or if you have like 9,400 left, there isn't a fighter you can put in. You have to have at least 200 left on the table. So I'll leave some salary on the table in that way. You'll end up with some combinations because like the duplicative pricing and the pricing gaps. I'll end up with some lineups that have more lineups than I normally would, that have like a few $100s left on the table. But I don't think it's a good card. Like if you start leaving like $1,000 on the table, your chances of getting 6 wins have dropped more so than they do on most cards because of the lopsided lines.
Okay, well, we'll be talking a little bit about this more tomorrow on MMA Crunch Time. That's 1 p.m. Eastern tomorrow, Saturday. Me and Mike H3 Buddha will, once we have, especially with the 3 fights needing, inside the distance line, we'll talk more about that. Obviously, if you're a RotoGrinders premium member, you could listen to the Ground and Pound podcast and the video and everything. We got behind the paywall, so go check that out. We also have our fantasy pick'em tool is free today, I believe. We got it free. We got Freebie Friday. Fantasy pick'em tool. Go check that out also. But if you want to become a combo premium member, especially with NFL season coming up, right? Click on that link in the description. Get $40 off your first month. And John, you're heading out tomorrow to another live final, right?
Yeah. Supposed to be heading out tonight or this afternoon. I don't have a flight yet. I have a return flight, but I had to adjust my flight out. So yeah, it's a good question. Heading out to Chicago at some point today. Don't know when. So yeah, they got the DK DraftKings baseball live final coming up. Got 2 entries, so hopefully that goes well. And it'll be a great Saturday because we got that baseball and then we got the UFC card as well.
So if you want to give Squirrel Patrol good luck, hit that thumbs up button. Give me those thumbs. Give them some good luck at the live final. Hit the subscribe button if you're new here. Hit the notification bell to always know when we go live. Later today, 5 p.m. Eastern, Dean and the guys, Grinders Live for MLB. That's followed by Crunch Time at 6:15 Eastern with Kevin Rock giving you all the weather updates and last-minute news and information leading up until lock. But I will be on tomorrow, 1 p.m. Eastern for MMA Crunch Time, and then back next week because I'm always here for you Monday through Friday, 11 o'clock Eastern, talking about all things you're thinking about in daily fantasy props and pick 'em on RotoGrinders Today.